The Ozark Mountains in 1879 were a place of silence and shadow, a vast expanse of hills and valleys where the trees seemed to whisper to one another and where light often struggled to penetrate the thick canopy. The land was wild, unforgiving, and full of both promise and danger. Families carved out small farms on rough soil, surviving more on grit than on bounty, and travelers moved cautiously along dirt roads, knowing that the mountains could just as easily hide a friend as they could a stranger who meant harm. It was in this quiet yet uneasy corner of America that two brothers began the journey that would etch their names into one of the region's most haunting mysteries. The year itself carried a weight of uncertainty. Reconstruction was fading into memory, and the country was restless, shifting into new ways of life, but not yet free from old wounds. In towns scattered near the Ozarks, life looked simple from the outside. Men worked their fields, women tended homes, and children roamed the forest with bare feet and scraped knees. But beneath this picture of rural calm were unspoken struggles, debts owed, land disputes, jealousies that simmered between neighbors, and the heavy silence of families carrying secrets they could not share. It was a world that could turn cold very quickly, even in the middle of summer. The brothers were known as hard-working, steady men, the kind that others respected but rarely fully understood. They had grown up with the mountains in their blood, raised by a father who taught them to hunt, to fish, and to never look too long into the woods at night. People said the brothers carried themselves with a certain pride, not arrogance, but a quiet confidence that made others notice them. They were bound together not just by blood, but by a closeness that was both admired and envied. Where one went, the other followed, as if they were two halves of a same person. To those who knew them, it seemed natural, unbreakable, and perhaps even unsettling. The expedition into the Ozarks was not their first venture into the wilderness, but it carried a sense of importance. They were not young boys chasing adventure anymore. They were men with responsibilities, ambitions, and unspoken pressures pressing down on them. Some whispered that they were searching for new land, a place to settle that might give them a chance to build something larger than what they had inherited. Others thought they were after something more hidden, gold, treasure, or even secrets buried deep in the mountains by those who had passed long before them. The truth was likely simpler, but no one ever agreed on what drove them into the thick woods that summer. Life before their departure was marked by small details that only seemed meaningful later. A lingering look was exchanged between one brother and a neighbor whose loyalty was questionable. A sharp word spoken at a town gathering, quickly laughed off but remembered by those who overheard. A letter left unopened on a kitchen table, its seal broken but its contents unread aloud. These were the pieces of a puzzle that only made sense after the brothers were gone. When people began to wonder if their disappearance had less to do with the wildness of the mountains and more to do with the people who lived in their shadow, the town itself was a mix of hope and suspicion. People helped one another when they had to, but gossip spread faster than fire. Every man's success was measured against another's, and every woman's reputation was weighed carefully. In such a place, relationships were never simple. Respect was fragile, and envy could twist into something dangerous. The brothers, with their bond and determination, were not immune to the eyes that watched them, nor to the undercurrents of tension that ran through the community that on the surface, their lives looked steady. They worked hard, they were dependable, and they carried themselves with honor. Yet beneath it there were cracks. Power shifted subtly between them. One more decisive, the other more cautious, one restless for change while the other held to tradition. It was a balance that could hold, but only as long as no outside force disrupted it. The mountains, with their silence and shadows, would test that balance in ways neither of them could have expected. When the brothers packed their supplies, loaded their rifles, and tightened the straps on their gear, no one thought much of it. Men often went into the mountains for days at a time, hunting or trapping, returning with pelts or stories of close calls with wolves or storms. But as they stepped onto the narrow path leading into the dense forest, there was something in the air, something heavy, almost watchful. Some would later say they felt it too, a change in the wind, a strange stillness in the trees. As if the land itself knew what was coming at the time, it was nothing more than another day in the Ozarks, another journey into the wilderness. Yet, the absence of their return would soon turn the ordinary into legend, and the quiet into a story whispered for generations. For now, though, their world was still whole, still untouched, but fragile in ways no one yet understood. The first days of the brothers' journey into the Ozark Mountains were filled with the ordinary rhythm of wilderness travel. They rose at dawn, broke camp, and followed narrow deer trails that twisted between cliffs and streams. Their boots sank into soft earth, rifles slung across their backs, and their conversations were low, practical. But even in those quiet beginnings, something heavier moved beneath the surface. They were not boys anymore, and their reasons for being out there were far more complicated than a simple hunt. The younger brother carried a restlessness in his eyes, a hunger for something more than the land their father had left them. He spoke of new beginnings, of finding land untouched by greedy hands, of building something greater than what had been given. The older one, though steady and cautious, grew irritated by this impatience. He believed in preserving what they had, in protecting their roots, not chasing shadows. At night, when they sat by the fire, the glow revealed the flicker of resentment between them. Unspoken words that left long silences stretching into the dark. Back home, the picture was just as tense. Their land was struggling, debts whispered about by neighbors, and the weight of expectation pressed down harder with every season that passed. Their family name carried respect, but respect was fragile when crops failed and whispers of unpaid accounts traveled from porch to porch. Every decision the brothers made carried the echo of those pressures. Their journey into the mountains was not only about adventure, it was about proving themselves. And that pressure, silent yet suffocating, followed them like a third presence in the woods. Some watched them leave with more than casual interest. A neighbor who had once quarreled with their father over a property line saw their expedition as reckless. Another man, bitter from a debt unsettled, muttered that perhaps the brothers thought themselves better than the rest of the town. These mutterings, harmless on the surface, laid the foundation for suspicion when the brothers did not return. In such a place, jealousy and rivalry carried sharp edges. The bond between the brothers, admired by many, was not unbreakable. The older brother carried authority, unspoken but felt. He made decisions, directed their steps, and often dismissed the younger's impatience as childish. Yet, as days stretched into weeks, the younger's resentment grew. He wanted his voice heard, his ambitions recognized. The wilderness, instead of uniting them, gave space for these tensions to breathe. A snapped branch, a wrong turn, a missed shot at the game, all became sparks for arguments. Their bond, once seamless, began to fray. There were moments when silence spoke louder than words. At a creek, when they stopped to refill their canteens, the younger brother stood apart, staring into the water as if seeing something far away. The older called to him, but the reply was clipped, dismissive. At night, when coyotes howled in the distance, the older brother urged caution, but the younger brushed it off, saying the wilderness did not scare him. These small clashes piled upon one another, building a wall neither of them wanted to acknowledge but could not avoid. Whispers of their family's past also followed them. Their father had been a hard man, respected but feared, his voice carrying weight both at home and in town. He had raised his sons to rely on each other, to stand strong against outsiders, but he had also sown seeds of rivalry. Praise was uneven, often favoring one over the other, leaving deep scars hidden beneath brotherly loyalty. Now, in the silence of the woods, those old wounds reopened. The younger still remembered nights when he was told to follow, never to lead. The older remembered the burden of being expected to hold everything together. The ghosts of their father's lessons walked with them, unseen but present in every decision. As the days wore on, their supplies dwindled faster than planned. A storm forced them to spend 2 nights soaked and shivering, food running low, tempers short. The younger accused the older of poor planning, while the older snapped back that recklessness wasted what little they had. Their voices carried into the dark, startling the forest around them, until silence fell again, thick, suffocating, and unresolved. External pressures weighed on them more heavily than the weather. Back in town, people spoke of men disappearing into the mountains, rumors of outlaws and strangers hiding in caves. Some even whispered of darker forces, old superstitions about the land, curses that clung to those who disturbed what lay buried beneath the soil. Whether the brothers believed these stories or not, they knew the danger of human hands was real enough. Outlaws roamed those hills, men with nothing to lose, watching for travelers who carried supplies worth taking. Every step into the wilderness was also a step closer to such dangers. Yet it was not only strangers they had to fear. Within themselves, darker emotions began to take root. The younger brother, restless and defiant, began to imagine a life where he did not have to follow. The older, worn by responsibility, wondered if his brother's recklessness would destroy them both. The forest, vast and isolating, gave no distraction from these thoughts. Instead, it echoed them, making them louder, sharper, harder to ignore. At the T1 point, they crossed paths with a trapper, a man weathered by years in the hills. He greeted them with caution, eyes narrow, words clipped. He warned them of dangerous ground ahead, of caves that swallowed men whole, of people who had gone missing before. The older brother nodded, thanked him, and urged caution. But the younger, impatient, laughed it off, dismissing the man as a relic of fear and superstition. T was a moment that widened the gulf between them. One more sign that they were no longer walking the same path, even as they shared it. Hidden agendas began to surface, though not openly spoken. The younger's ambitions, perhaps tied to rumors of gold or secret caches in the mountains, clashed with the older's need for stability and survival. Each step forward became a test of loyalty. Should they chase opportunity or guard what they already had? The answer shifted with every argument, with every weary mile. The deeper they went, the more fragile their relationship became. The older brother's patience thinned, his voice sharper, his control slipping. The younger's defiance hardened, his silences colder, his gaze fixed on horizons the other could not see. They were still bound, still tied by blood and necessity, but the rope between them was fraying. Every word, every silence, every look carried weight. The forest seemed to listen, waiting for the moment when the breaking point would come. By the time the sun set on their second week, they were no longer the same men who had stepped into the trees. The wilderness had stripped them down, peeled away the appearance of unity, and revealed what lay beneath. Resentment, fear, ambition, and the heavy pull of choices that could not be undone. What began as a shared journey was shifting into something else, something darker, something inevitable. The forest had grown heavier as the days stretched into weeks, its silence pressing down on the brothers until even the sound of their own footsteps seemed too loud. By now, their supplies were nearly gone, and the tension between them had hardened into something sharp and brittle. The older brother walked with his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the path, while the younger lagged, muttering curses under his breath, kicking stones as though the land itself had betrayed him. The air between them was so charged it felt like even the trees leaned in, waiting for what would come. The breaking point came on a gray morning, when the mist clung low over the ground and the woods seemed to blur into shadows. They had argued again the night before, voices carrying into the stillness until birds took flight from the branches. The younger had accused the older of leading them in circles, of clinging to safety when opportunity lay further ahead. The older had snapped back that his brother's recklessness would get them both killed. Neither had slept well. Their fire burned out to cold ash, and they rose with anger still heavy in their chests as they walked. The younger stopped suddenly at the edge of a clearing. He turned, shoulders squared, his face pale, but his eyes burning with fury. He said he was done following. His voice cracked with the force of it, echoing against the trees. The older stopped, turning slowly, his own expression a mask of exhaustion and disbelief. For years, he had been the one to lead, the one to bear the weight. And now here was his brother standing against him, shaking with defiance. The fight began with words, harsh and cutting. The younger's voice was filled with years of resentment. How he had been silenced, overlooked, treated as less. The older's replies were colder, shaped by duty and the bitterness of responsibility. He reminded his brother of debts, land, of the family name that still clung to them like a chain. The argument spiraled, each word sharper than the last, until the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Then came the shove. A sudden, desperate push from the younger, his palms slamming into his brother's chest. The older staggered back, boots slipping in the damp grass. And for a moment it might have ended there, a stumble, a curse, a pause to breathe. But the older's anger flared. He lunged forward, grabbing his brother's arm, and the struggle turned violent. Fists swung, bodies collided, their grunts and gasps filling the clearing as if the years of silence and restraint had erupted all at once. The younger's hand found the hilt of his knife, a small hunting blade, carried more for skinning game than for killing men. His fingers closed around it in desperation, not thought. The older saw the glint of steel and tried to wrest it away, his hands gripping his brother's wrist. The two of them locked in a brutal dance. Their boots tore the earth, their weight crashed against a fallen log, and their breaths came in ragged bursts. The younger's face was wild, eyes wide with fear and fury, while the older's was set with grim determination. It happened in a rush, too fast for either to take back. The younger twisted free, the blade sliding upward, and the older stumbled into it. A gasp tore from his throat as the knife sank deep. His eyes widened, shock more than pain at first, and then the sound of his breath rattled as blood spread across his shirt. The younger froze, his hands still on the handle, staring at what he had done. The forest, once loud with their struggle, fell silent except for the sound of his brother choking, falling to his knees, clutching at the wound as if he could push life back inside. The moment stretched unbearably, the older's body trembling, his face pale as he collapsed to the ground. The younger dropped the knife, his chest heaving, his mind screaming against what his eyes showed him. He stumbled back, hands shaking, whispers spilling from his lips, half denial, half prayer. He hadn't meant it, not like this. It wasn't supposed to end like this. The knife lay glistening with blood on the earth, a terrible witness to his rage and mistake. For a heartbeat, he knelt beside his brother, pressing his hands against the wound, begging him to hold on. The older's eyes, once so stern and certain, now stared up with a strange mix of pain and betrayal. His lips moved as if to speak, but no words came, only the harsh rasp of air slipping away. The younger begged louder, his voice breaking, but the forest did not answer. The older's body went still, his chest no longer rising, and the truth crashed down with a weight heavier than the mountains themselves. Panic surged. The younger stood, pacing the clearing, his hands covered in blood, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked to the trees, half expecting someone to step out, to have witnessed it all. But there was no one, only the endless woods, silent and suffocating. His thoughts raced. What would he tell the town? What would he tell? Their family? He imagined the looks, the whispers, the judgment. His life, already pressed by debt and suspicion, would be destroyed. In his terror, he tried to rationalize. It had been an accident, a fight gone too far. He told himself this again and again, as though repeating it would make it true. But the blood on his hands refused to listen. The body at his feet refused to rise. He considered running, disappearing into the wilderness, and never returning. But the mountains were vast, unforgiving, and he was alone now. Alone in a way he had never been before. That he dragged the body to the edge of the clearing, his muscles straining, his breath ragged. Each pull of his brother's weight felt like another nail sealing his fate. He found a shallow hollow near a cluster of rocks, half hidden by brambles, and began to cover the body with earth and leaves. His hands moved frantically, shoving dirt and branches, his mind numb with horror. When it was done, the mound was crude, unfinished, but but he could not bear to touch it anymore. He staggered back, staring at the earth as if it would rise and accuse him. The knife he left buried beneath the soil, unable to look at it again. His brother's belongings he tucked hastily into his own pack, as though erasing the evidence might erase the act itself. But nothing could erase the memory, the weight of his brother's last breath, the look in his eyes as life slipped away. That would stay with him forever, a shadow no forest could hide. As dusk fell, he sat at the edge of the clearing, trembling, his mind replaying every moment. The rage, the struggle, the final collapse. He tried to imagine what he would say when he returned to town, how he could shape this into a story that did not brand him a killer. But every word he thought of turned to ash in his throat. The forest around him seemed to close in, darker than ever. The trees was sparry. In the truth he could never silence. By the time night swallowed the clearing, the younger brother knew nothing would ever be the same. The man who had entered the mountains with his brother was gone. In his place sat someone marked by blood, by guilt, by the weight of a crime that could never be undone. The wilderness had taken one brother's life, and with it, it had stolen the other's soul. The younger brother left the clearing in a daze, stumbling through the forest as though the trees themselves were pushing him away from the place where his world had ended. His legs carried him without direction, his mind numb, his chest aching with the weight of what he had done. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig behind him sent a shiver down his spine, as if the ghost of his brother was following, watching, judging. He muttered to himself in broken whispers, trying to weave a story he could live with. An accident, a mistake, a fight that went too far. Yet no matter how he shaped the words, they always came back to the same truth. He had killed his own blood. When he finally emerged from the forest days later, his appearance startled those who saw him. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt, his eyes wild with exhaustion. Neighbors rushed to ask where his brother was, what had happened on the expedition, but his answers were stumbling, fragmented. He spoke of a storm, of losing track of each other in the chaos, of searching until his strength gave out. His voice cracked with practiced grief, but those who knew him best noticed something strange. His words lacked the certainty of truth, and his eyes often darted away when pressed for details. At the tea first, the community wanted to believe him. The brothers had been admired for their bond, and no one could imagine one without the other. Search parties were formed, men combing the hills with dogs and lanterns, calling the older brother's name until their throats W. Irraw. The mountains gave back nothing but silence. Nobody, no belongings, no clear trail. The mystery deepened, and with it, suspicion began to grow. The younger brother tried to carry on, but guilt gnawed at him with relentless hunger. At night, he dreamed of the clearing, of his brother's eyes in those final moments, and he woke drenched in sweat, convinced he heard footsteps outside his door. In the daylight, he forced himself to work, but every task felt hollow, every glance from neighbors heavy with unspoken questions. His hands shook when he held tools, his temper flared over the smallest things, and when alone, he often spoke aloud to the brother who was no longer there. Back at home, the family bore the weight of confusion and grief. Their mother aged visibly in a matter of weeks, her face lined with sorrow as she clung to the hope that her son might still walk back through the door. She lit candles, whispered prayers, and searched the horizon with tired eyes, refusing to believe he was gone. Their father, once a stern and commanding man, grew silent, his pride shattered. He had raised his sons to rely on each other, to stand as one, and now that bond had been broken in the most violent way imaginable. Though he never said it aloud, he began to look at the surviving son with a sharpness that bordered on accusation. The town, too, shifted in its perception. At first, they pitied the younger brother, offering him food, company, and prayers. But as the weeks stretched into months with no sign of the older brother, whispers turned to rumors. Some claimed the wilderness had taken him, that wolves or bandits had left no trace. Others, darker in tone, suggested that the surviving brother knew more than he said. They noticed the way his story changed in small ways, how his grief seemed forced at times, how guilt clung to him like a second skin. For the younger brother, every day became a battle between holding his secret and breaking under the weight of it. He convinced himself it had been self-defense, that the fight had spiraled beyond his control, that he had not truly meant to take a life. Yet the memory would not let him rest. He saw his brother's face in every shadow, heard his last breath in the silence before sleep. The guilt twisted him, hollowed him out, until even the simplest joys of life, the warmth of a fire, the sound of laughter in town, felt like accusations. The investigation was slow, informal, but persistent. In 1879, law enforcement in the mountains was thin, often left to local sheriffs and the will of the community. Questions were asked, trails were traced, and though no evidence surfaced, the absence of answers fueled suspicion. The younger brother endured long talks with men who asked the same things again and again. Where had they last camped? Which direction had his brother gone? Why hadn't he searched longer? His replies were always shaky, always incomplete. The community began to split in their beliefs. Some defended him, saying the mountains were cruel and unforgiving, that no man should be blamed for surviving. Others, quieter but firm, believed the truth was darker, that blood had been spilled not by chance, but by choice. Children whispered the story to each OT, her at night, and mothers hushed them, though their eyes lingered with doubt. For the family, the loss cut deeper than words could hold. The absence of one son was grief enough, but the shadow of suspicion over the other poisoned what little peace remained. Family dinners were silent, their father staring into his plate, their mother clutching a handkerchief wet with tears. The surviving brother sat among them, but felt like a ghost himself, trapped between denial and confession. The crime had not only taken his brother's life, it had stolen his place in the world. The man who once walked proudly beside his kin now found himself isolated, watched and mistrusted. Every nod in the street, every quiet word exchanged behind his back, reminded him that the bond that had defined his life was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. Months passed, and nobody was found. The story of the vanished brothers hardened into legend. Some said the mountains had claimed them both, that the one who returned was only half of what once existed. Others whispered of betrayal, of a brother who carried blood on his hands, but no proof on his conscience. The Ozarks held their secrets well, and without answers, the people filled the silence with their own tales. For the younger brother, the burden of guilt never lessened. He lived with it, as one lives with a wound that never heals, tender and raw, always reminding him of the moment that shattered everything. He had survived, but survival was no gift. It was a sentence, binding him to a memory he could never escape. His reputation, once steady, now lived in shadow. His family's name, once strong, was now spoken with hesitation. And in the stillness of the night, when even the town was quiet, he heard his brother's voice in the wind, a reminder that the past would never let him go, in the years that followed. The story of the two brothers who vanished in the Ozark Mountains hardened into a kind of ghost tale, half history, half legend. The community never received the closure it longed for. There was no body carried home, no grave to mourn beside, no clear evidence to seal what had happened in those silent woods. Instead, the absence itself became the wound, and wounds without answers rarely heal. The younger brother lived on, but he was never the same. His life became smaller, quieter, as though he were trying to fold himself into the background, hoping the whispers would one day fade. They never did. Justice, in any formal sense, was never served. There were no charges, no trial, no courtroom where truth could be laid bare. The law, limited in reach and power in that time and place, relied on evidence that simply wasn't there. Without a body, without proof, suspicion remained just that, suspicion. Yet, justice has more than one form. For the younger brother, the punishment came not from sheriffs or courts, but from within himself. He carried the weight of guilt every day, his nights haunted by the memory of his brother's eyes in those final moments. He lived, but he lived under a sentence harsher than many prisons could offer: isolation, mistrust, and the unrelenting shadow of High's own actions. The family bore their own burden. Their father, once proud and unyielding, seemed to crumble under the loss. His voice, which had once commanded respect, grew quiet, his presence fading until he was only a shadow of the man he had been. Their mother clung to hope for years, insisting that perhaps her son still walked the earth, lost but alive. Hope can be cruel when it refuses to die, and hers kept her tied to a grief that never eased. For them, the surviving son was both comfort and curse, living proof of what had been lost, but also a reminder of the absence that hung over their home like a storm cloud. The town never fully decided what it believed. Some continued to defend the younger brother, insisting that the wilderness itself was to blame. Others, with sharp eyes and sharper tongues, held to the belief that blood had been spilled by his own hand. The divide lingered in every interaction, in every hushed conversation when he entered a room. His reputation, once steady, now carried cracks that never mended. Children grew up with the story whispered to them, their parents telling it as both a warning and a mystery. The case became less about two men and more about what their story represented: the fragility of trust, the violence that lurks in silence, and the way secrets fester when truth is buried. The broader impact stretched beyond one family or one town. Stories like these in that era shaped how people thought about trust, about family bonds, and about the wilderness that surrounded them. The Ozarks were already a place of superstition, and the disappearance of two brothers added to its aura of mystery. Some saw it as a reminder that the mountains took as much as they gave, that survival depended not only on skill, but on unity. Others saw in a reflection of human weakness, the way pride, anger, and resentment can destroy even the closest of bonds. The absence of justice also raised quiet questions about law and order in such isolated places. Without clear evidence, without modern tools of investigation, communities often had to live with shadows instead of answers. The lack of resolution forced people to face the uncomfortable truth that justice does not always come, that sometimes guilt walks free while the innocent are buried in silence. It was a reminder that morality and law are not always the same, and that human behavior is often too complex to be neatly judged by the standards of the day. At its heart, the story of the brothers was not only about a disappearance, but about power, control, and the fragile balance within human relationships. The older brother had carried authority, the role of leader, while the younger had simmered in resentment and longing for his own voice. Their tragedy revealed how thin the line can be between loyalty and rivalry, between love and resentment. It showed how the weight of societal pressures, debts, reputation, the demand to prove oneself, can twist private struggles into deadly ones that in the end, the story forces us to look inward. How well do we truly know those closest to us? How much unspoken resentment can lie beneath years of loyalty and love? And what happens when pride and anger go unchecked, when silence becomes heavier than words? These questions linger, unanswered, just as the case itself remained unsolved in the eyes of the law. For the younger brother, life stretched on, but it was no life of peace. He worked the land, kept to himself, and grew older under the watchful eyes of a community that never forgot. Some said he carried a haunted look until his last days, as if he were still living in that clearing, replaying the moment over and over, unable to escape it. In a way, his punishment was never-ending, because the crime lived inside him, unseen but inescapable. The story of the brothers became part of the fabric of the Ozarks, retold in whispers by firesides, in taverns, and in families who warned their children not to let anger consume them. It served as a lesson, though no one could agree on what the lesson truly was. Some said it was about the dangers of pride, others about the cruelty of fate, and still others about the thinness of the line between good men and desperate acts. Perhaps the true tragedy lies not only in the death itself, but in the way the crime unraveled everything it touched: the family, the community, the faith in justice, and the very idea of brotherhood. The disappearance became more than a cold case. It became a mirror of the human condition, reflecting the flaws, the tensions, and the frailties that define us. And so, the story closes not with answers, but with silence. The mountains still stand, the trees still whisper, and the clearing where one brother fell has long been swallowed by earth and roots. But the echoes remain. Justice, in its truest form, was never served, yet the weight of guilt and the shadow of loss served as punishment enough. In the end, the tale of the vanished brothers is not only about what happened in the Ozarks in 1879. It is about what always lies within us, the capacity for love, for loyalty, and for destruction.